So you're new to woodworking. How do you properly sand your woodworking projects? Hi, my name is Robert Dailey with Dailey Woodworks and the Recreationalwoodworker.com, where we help you build great furniture. Today I'm going to go over my sanding process for tabletops, and this process translates to pretty much anything you're going to sand. And we're going to be using two main tools today. The first tool is my Festool Rotex sander. This is my favorite sander ever. In the end card and the description, I'm going to link to my sanders, a sanders playlist where I've reviewed all my various sanders that I own, and go through kind of all of that as well. But let's dive in and get started. And first thing we're going to do is talk about the preparation. So I glued up my tabletop. No tabletop is going to be perfectly flat out of the clamps unless you're just an amazing woodworker, or I'm a really bad woodworker because I've used everything from dominoes, biscuits, pressure plate, like all that. I don't get a perfectly flat table. Oh, I've got little ridges between the seams. My first step is to flatten those seams. You can do that one of two ways. Some guys use the belt sander. I use the Rotex in Rotex mode. I always start with 40 grit and just hit those seams, knock them down. That's my first step. I've already done that on this tabletop. And then you can see I've added pencil lines. That is so I know where I've sanded, where I haven't sanded, and I don't oversand or undersand different spots. One of the first things I do once I get to the 80 grit stage, which is probably going to be a lot of your first stages, is I fill any knot holes or voids with Star Bond medium thick brown adhesive. This stuff has been a game changer in my shop. They reached out to me. They sent me a free sample kit to basically promote their product, and then I was like, this stuff's amazing, and then I've just been buying it myself with my own money ever since. There is an affiliate link to this in the description and a promo code, so check that out. But I fill in knot holes with that. It's amazing. You put a little bit in, you spray it with this, in about 10 seconds, it's dry. In about 5 minutes, it's ready to sand. Truly amazing, and since it's already brown, it's invisible whenever you hit it with stains or anything like that. They make a clear, they make a black. While I'm sanding, I'm going across the grain. Now, you've probably heard it said always go with the grain when you're setting. When you have probably heard always go with the grain as you're sanding. That is true if you're hand sanding. A random orbital sander or a Rotex gear-driven rotary sander spins. So there's no going with the grain. It's spinning in a circle. So what I do is I'll go across my grain, across my joints. That way I'm kind of hitting those high spots and low spots together, and it just helps me get a flatter tabletop so I don't end up with kind of a washboard table. And I have found that works really well for me. So this is 80 grit, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing, followed up with 120 grit in Rotex mode. Now this is extremely important. Between every grit and every sanding, you want to blow off your workpiece. Yes, I'm using Festool, which is touted as the best dust collection in the world, and it is extremely good and definitely better than anything else I've used. However, there's still dust and pieces of grit from your sandpaper that will be left on your surface. If you don't get those off, your new sandpaper with your higher grit might catch that other sandpaper grit and leave swirl marks and gouges. For the best possible finish, you want to blow everything off and before moving to your next grit. This is also a good time to double check to make sure all your knot holes are filled and do any touch-ups if you need to. And as always, I mark my workpiece with pencil lines before starting the next grit so I know where I've sanded and where I haven't sanded. So I do 40 to flatten, 80 to remove those scratch marks. Now I'm going to do 120 in Rotex mode before cutting my top to its final size and doing all my profiles. Okay, so I have it sanded to 120. I've cut it to its final size and I've routed all my profiles. I went ahead and edge sanded everything with my final grit with a smaller sander. Now I need to do my final sanding on the top. I'm going to repeat the process of blowing off all the dust. I'm going to add the step of slightly wiping down with a damp rag. That's going to pop the grain and raise the grain. Then I'm going to do my final sanding with 120 grit with my Mercadero sander. Now, I used to sand up to 220 and then stain. Then I went to 180 and did it. But what I have found, especially with stain grade material, we use a lot of beech, red oak, and white oak. That if you over sand, your stain isn't going to absorb into the wood as well. So through trial and error of staining something, this looks like crap. Okay, well, what do? Let's sand it down and try again with a lower grit and see what happens. The results were better. So I'm now only sanding up to 120 grit. Now there's a reason I'm using my Mercaderos for the final sanding instead of my Festool Rotex. I've explained the differences between those two sanders in another video, so I'll link to that later. But that's going to be our process here. So let's get started on that final sanding. And now I have my Mercadero set up with its 6-inch pad, and I'm going to sand this the same way, blow all the dust off, and then it's going to be ready to be stained. And then I'll show you the finished product with it stained so you can see how nice it turns out. One final thing I'd like to mention is I always clean off the pad of my sander before the final sand and use a brand new sheet of sandpaper. This is the Festool Granat Net. It's not my favorite sandpaper. My favorite is the regular Granat paperback sandpaper. But this is what I have, so this is what I'm using on this project, and I'm using my Mercaderos with the 5mm stroke. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video all the way through. I hope you learned something, and you are probably wondering what exactly the difference is between the Festool Rotex and the Mercadero sander, and why you might choose one or the other, and why you might want both. Especially if you're starting to look at the professional level sanders. These are both some of the most expensive sanders on the market, and in my opinion, some of the best. So click the card. I'm not sure which side it's going to be on for the comparison between these two, where I highlight the differences between them, and that might answer some of your questions to help you decide which one of these you might want to start with in your woodworking shop. I'm also going to include some final pictures of our finished project so you can see how nice it turned out. I'll cover finishing in a future video.